So hi everyone, so I'm Sonal. I'm one of the co-founders and the Chief Technology Officer, not the Executive Officer. Don't want to be that bossy. But my background has been predominantly software engineering and leading teams of software engineers for about 20 plus years. I started really young, of course. But prior to setting up Exate, I was at HSBC for about 8 years, where I supported the management office for the markets division. And then I did 2 years of corporate and institutional digital. So that's trying to roll out software in probably about 65 different countries, multi-billion-dollar programs. I did the CTO function for that there, and had so many different issues when it came to data, and all of the rising threats around data, APIs, etc. So off the back of that, ended up setting up Exate to deal with lots of different challenges around that space. But the biggest thing that we were looking to deal with was data sovereignty, and how we actually keep data within jurisdictions. So if we're looking at, I was just speaking to a gentleman a little while ago, we're looking at HIPAA regulations where data needs to reside within Florida or different states. So our technology helps with things like that. But I'm sure you're also here to hear about from the others as well. So I'll pass it over to Chuck to do his own introduction.
Good morning, everyone. Chuck Grindle. I'm an executive advisor at Proofpoint for the public sector. I'm a retired military officer, spent 30 years in the Army. First date was blowing stuff up, and then I realized that probably wasn't a thing that I should be doing much longer, and switched over to IT. My last assignment was teaching strategy and cyber operations at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where I live. I then was asked to be Governor Bevin's CIO for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, so I did that during his tenure. And then I joined AWS. Elections have consequences, right? That happens. Joined AWS, and then we had implemented Proofpoint in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and so I joined Proofpoint as their executive advisor. Pleasure to be with you today.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Cristian Rodriguez. I'm the field CTO of the Americas for CrowdStrike. I've been with the company for over 10 years, so going on 11 years. I basically work with a variety of different enterprises and state, local, health, to understand basically how they secure their environments against some pretty evolving tradecraft we're seeing from an e-crime, nation state, and hacktivist perspective. 20 years in the industry overall. I also co-host the Adversary Universe podcast, so smash that subscribe button when you get a chance, please, and send it to your friends. We need the likes. But yeah, really happy to be here to talk about insider threat, and even pull us aside after this if you have any more questions also.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Reis. I'm the Chief Information and Digital Officer for the University of Miami and the University of Miami Health System. I've been involved in cybersecurity, I can't believe I'm about to say this, since 2003. I can remember taking the CISSP boot camp in Bush Kill, Pennsylvania, if everyone ever did that, like it was yesterday. Wow. And fast forward, it's over 20 years later, and many things have changed in cybersecurity, but many things are the same. And I look forward to talking with you today about some of the things I've seen over that 20-plus year career. Yeah.
Great. So in case you're wondering where this silly accent is from, it's from England, so great to be here too. But I thought I would start off with just like taking you back to 2023. Like, it was a great year. Barbie and Oppenheimer came out, which led to that Barbie and Oppenheimer. My kids were delighted by the Taylor Swift Eras tour. I got to go twice. It was amazing. But also, it was the same year that one of your top 50 Fortune 500 companies had a massive data breach. So what was taken was 75,735 sensitive data sets with 23,000 different documents. It had names, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, all the things that are sensitive that we're trying to protect. And 2 disgruntled employees were the ones that actually sold it to a foreign media outlet. Within that data set, it was Tesla that actually got breached, and it was over employee data. So within that, social security number was Elon Musk's data was also sold in that same data set. So, it was indeed a malicious attack of 2 really disgruntled employees. So 2 people were responsible for 75,000 people's data being stolen. Then if we look at something that was just purely accidental, and we look at what happened with Arup, which is a British multinational company, so in Hong Kong, one of their employees had a phishing email. It all started off with just a simple phishing email, clicked on it, and it led to, that was supported by a deepfake conversation on Zoom. And what actually happened with that was he made $25 million transaction because on that deepfake call was the CFO, there was senior executives, and they were all there telling him that he must make this transaction, which he went on to do. So in that case, was that malicious? Absolutely not. He just fell for a trick. So it leads me to my first question. So when we talk about insider threats, what do we really mean? Is it negligence, malicious intent, or both?
Well, I think from my perspective, and I draw on both military and the Commonwealth of Kentucky, we all trust our employees. We know they're going to do the right thing. But you have to realize that you are going to have some that become disgruntled for some reason. And then you have some that are going to be ignorant to what they are doing, and they accidentally do things. I think there's also another category, and that is someone that thinks that they know better. They know the compliance standard, they know the rules, they know what they should be doing, but they think they can get away with it because they think they can be more productive by doing X, Y, or Z. They know the rules, but yet they don't necessarily wish to follow them, or essentially to bend them a little bit, and then that's what gets them into trouble. So I think there's at least malicious, I think there's somewhat ignorance, dumbfounded users, but I also think there are, and this can be the most challenging, right? We put all the tools in place, we do all the right things, but then we have that one that says, regardless of that, I'm going to still go and do X, Y, or Z. And that, I think, becomes a challenge.
Yeah, I think, and this is just me speaking generally about all the places I've worked over my 30-plus year career, not any particular organization. But what I've seen is it almost doesn't matter whether it's malicious intent or someone was duped into doing something ill-advised. The consequence is the same.
Yeah.
And so from my standpoint, I think what we endeavor to do from a security practitioner standpoint is to not focus so much on categorizing the intent behind the action, but just focus on finding the action and then really ensuring that we have quick ways to respond to that. It is easier and easier to be duped into clicking on something and generating that Zoom event or clicking on that email and filling something out. And the consequences of that are equally as catastrophic as a malicious insider actor. And every day when we scroll our news feeds, we read about the next malicious actor who was hired maliciously to do malicious things, deeply embedded in Fortune 500 companies, which is yet another tier, right? There's the person that was hired with good intent and became a bad actor. Then there's the person that was always a bad actor and hired. And then there's the person who maliciously clicked on, who was duped into clicking on something with no malicious intent but had a malicious outcome. So I think from our standpoint, from an operational standpoint, from a technology standpoint, focus more on what we're trying to protect rather than the origin of why we're trying to protect it.
Yeah, I'd add that there is something to be said about having a good level of awareness when it comes to understanding, for example, North Korea has been part of a campaign that we've been tracking with the DOJ, where they've been embedding actual agents within a tremendous amount of companies from a DevOps perspective. So we're talking about agents that are working on behalf of the DPRK, that are developers. Their salaries are essentially going into Kim Jong-un's weapons system program, and that ultimately is fueling and funding that. But they're also embedding malware in a lot of the software packages that they're responsible for developing. And so I think, to your point, I think the risk is always there. It never changes based upon whether there's intent or whether there's something accidental, but having an awareness of maybe I need to change my hiring program to now vet out what is the likelihood of me or my organization potentially hiring someone that is working on behalf of a nation state that has true intention to do something malicious.
Yeah, and I think the remote work proliferation just makes that all the more easy.
It exacerbates that, undoubtedly.
It really enables that.
Yeah, we've been in a joking fashion saying, hey, if you're trying to vet someone that's you believe is a potential agent of the DPRK, there's some very basic questions you can ask. Hey, like, that Kim Jong-un guy's wild, right? It's crazy. What do you think of that? And if that person, we've actually been on sessions where enterprises have brought us in during their hiring process, and we've asked them to say something very negative about Kim Jong-un, and they've ended these Zoom interviews, right, in an effort to probably avoid assassination in some capacity. But these are real situations where nation-state level activity is embedding itself into your hiring processes, and making your HR team aware of this is extremely important, I think, right?
Yeah, so talking about crazy guys, has anyone been out with the digital era team? They did say to me earlier, I had to say, Miami, really loud. And I said I wouldn't do it, but I did because I thought it would be fun. But we all know it's really difficult to manage insider threats. And even with all the tech and all the tools and all the training, God, every time I get the training, a little piece of me dies that I have to do it. But it's super important to do these things, and I get that. But why do we think it's so hard to manage these insider threats? So who wants to pick that? I'll go with David, because I know you were saying, do you trust everyone? Yeah, you're already mentioning that you have a bit of a zero trust attitude towards it. So
Yeah, I think creating a zero trust mindset, it doesn't say you distrust.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key piece, is zero trust doesn't mean distrust. And in fact, I think you would say, when we have a zero trust mindset, it's actually a more trusting environment, because we're creating the structures for people to do the right thing, and then creating the structures for, if that unintended thing happens, the systems to kick in and intercept. So I think from our standpoint, generally speaking, zero trust, and getting to a place where we really focus on the device, the user behavior, anomaly detection, and not just saying, oh, because it's on the private network, it's safe, because it's an employee logging in, everything they do is safe, and focusing more in on that. Trusting the connections once they've been established, not trusting the people trying to establish the connections.
Yeah. I think it also, there was a little bit in the earlier panel about psychology and the understanding of the people that you are hiring. And I equate that to a team, right? There's a dimensionality of each individual, and then there's a dimensionality of the team and the people you're hiring. There was a question in the chat about how does HR impact, or how can you work with HR? I think that all starts with an acceptable use policy that, that you've worked out with HR, which, tells individuals, here is what will happen if you do something that you shouldn't be doing. There's consequences, right, that have to be had. And then they have to be held accountable to those consequences. And so the tools that we buy and put in place are there to monitor. But it still goes back to the title of the presentation. It's human-centric, right? It boils down to that individual. And do you have the dimensionality set, and are you reviewing that team, those individuals, on a frequent enough basis, whether where someone is living on the edge a little bit?
Sure. No, I think that's pretty valid. I think every business is like this growing and breathing entity, right? And because of that, your business processes change, and you start to grow your business. You can put so many tools and policies in place, but to your point, reassessing the way that your employees interface with data and the new tools that your businesses introduce. It's almost if you ever, I have 3 kids are off in college now, but like back in the day when you're trying to create all these little safety features in your living room to make sure that they don't bump their head in the corner, and you're putting the wall plugs in, and all of a sudden like they're getting taller, so now you need to ensure that thing you would place on the counter is at a much higher out of their reach. And I think understanding that your business is growing, for example, all right, I'm going to say this, which may be questionable, right? But say AI is probably the new insider threat, right? I would much rather share my browsing history than my ChatGPT logs right now, right? I use it for relationship advice. It's very embarrassing.
And your cash credentials.
Exactly, right? But I think that because the way that you start to adopt new tools, people believe that their jobs can be easier if they start to introduce new tools into their whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. I think sometimes if you don't define guardrails, and even if you do define guardrails, people want to make their tasks easier or be a lot more efficient. And because of that, they inadvertently expose the business to more risk. And to your point, it's reassessing and re-educating on this is how you're going to impact the business if you do X. And yes, you have tools to help control that and guardrails to help enforce, right. But there's always going to be something new that comes out.
Yeah, and I think that's, on that piece, the zero trust concept, the internal piece, I think one of the things that from a security standpoint, we do to our own peril is make it too hard for the workers to do their work, and we almost force them to do the wrong thing just to get their jobs done.
Yeah.
And I think from a security practitioner standpoint, what our key differentiator isn't easy to say no, isn't easy yet another tool that stops you from doing that next thing, but it's actually thinking ourselves as enablers and trying to understand what is the business user or the business trying to get done, and not come up with 100 reasons why we get to say no, but that one reason, that one pathway to yes. That really starts to take down the likelihood of the unmalicious insider that becomes a threat just because they're trying to get their job done.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, going back to your zero trust, I think when we look at it still being like a really huge threat that the internal actors, how do we actually monitor the internal risk without creating that culture of like mistrust and because obviously there are always going to be actors that are going to be malicious internally, and you can go through HR processes, and there are so many things that you can potentially do, but how do you monitor that they're actually doing the right thing and making sure that we don't have that culture of distrust and surveillance and feeling like every move is being watched?
Sure. I think there's always a healthy level of paranoia, right? Everyone should know that they're being watched, especially if you're on a corporate asset. But I think identities are like the major focus for most adversaries these days. I think there's a stat recently of 80% of the breaches that we observed were tied to identities being compromised in some fashion, which means that if the adversaries are using them as in a path of least resistance, then your employee should also treat their credentials as if they are the crown jewels, right? And so understanding what your users, you made a really good point, David, on zero trust, right? I think identity is a very big kind of foundation for a proper zero trust framework. So it's understanding who is allowed to authenticate to what resource, but then I think the bigger question is, what is that same individual authorized to access? And what type of monitoring and controls do you have to understand that if my user authenticates in these areas, these are the applications or resources that they're authorized to access, and how do you start to almost, and think of it, it's fairly, I don't want to say bulbous, but you can work with this. It's very fluid, right? Because someone's role can change, or there could be exceptions that are needed to ensure the business is enabled versus you're inhibiting the business. And so I think it's understanding authentication, understanding authorization, understanding what data is out there, and then mapping that into a good framework that allows you to then identify outliers faster and then enforce on those.
Yeah, I think that 360 view, and not only having the controls to stop one, but do we know if they're trying to do something that they shouldn't
be doing? Yeah.
And then does that trigger an event for you to say, hey, look, this individual's been trying to do X, Y, and Z, right? So perhaps this individual is at a point where there's something going on with them or in their lives or whatever that we perhaps need to investigate, not to make it intrusive, but to be able to monitor and maybe talk with the supervisor, et cetera, so that we ensure that person isn't getting off the rails. So agree with that.
I think one of the keys, and it's hard, and there's no technology solution for this, is knowing your data flows.
Except for Exate.
Like what? Yeah.
I had to do my plug.
What's coming in, what's going out, what's normal coming in, what's normal going out, where do people log in from, what's all the normal logins look like at a country level, at a city level, what does abnormal look like, and not worry so much about the normals, but worry keenly about the abnormals. And so when you start to see 2 or 3 abnormal events lined up on an identity, you can quickly start to say there is something happening with that user identity on that machine from that location, and we better take a quicker look. So it's getting a good understanding of the flows, login flows, data flows, and then not looking for the normals, but quickly identifying the abnormals.
So when you do find out, so I'm going a bit off piste here, but when you do find out that some account looks like it's compromised, what would you do in that scenario? So what do you have in place? Do you have some sort of crisis type manifest that you've got within your organization that you can actually stop and prevent things from progressing?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is having a 24/7 security operations center, whether that's one that you staff yourselves or whether that's one that you subscribe to, is important. And then having standing protocols for an incident response team, that when that abnormal behavior is identified, people quickly get on a pick your favorite technology call and start to interact with that account. And the first thing is it's just as easy to change the password, kill all connections, and figure out what was going on than it is to spend hours trying to find out if we should kill the connections and reset the password. So a little bit of when something looks very anomalous, treat it as such, because it's easier to turn it on than it is to wish you would have turned it off.
Yeah, you'd rather get the phone call, why'd you do this?
Or
right?
call them and say, we're turning you off. Yeah.
Why'd you cut me off?
Yeah.
Versus have somebody penetrate something that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's where AI can help us in these elements where you want to run a 24-hour SOC, but that ability to shut that off when you don't have a body in the loop is critically important in that element.
Yeah.
And I think doing that in a way that's employee and user friendly. We're not saying you're doing something. We're saying it looks like something is happening with your account, and to protect your account, we're taking these following actions, and we'll follow up with you quickly. So more from protecting that account rather than accusing the person that they're doing something wrong.
You're much more diplomatic than I am.
Of course.
But in terms of taking practical steps for organizations to reduce that insider threat without slowing down productivity, and I know we touched on it, but in terms of, do you have any good tips?
Yeah, I'd say data is oil these days, right? Understanding, I mentioned identities and that authorization framework that you have, understanding an inventory of what are the applications in my environment that ultimately lead to things like sensitive data. When's the last time you've done business impact analysis on where's your data, who's accessing it, how often is that being accessed? And again, if you don't have a good data layer where you can start to create a baseline off of, it's much harder to create an outlier framework because you don't know what is anomalous at that point. And so I think understanding your internal business processes more so that you can identify when someone is breaking a business process or a malicious insider is then doing something that they shouldn't be doing. I think data is absolutely king, and it spans across even beyond just the identity side, right? Even if we're talking about real behavioral analytics, it's even like access card routines, and it's understanding if someone is logging onto VPN as frequently, if you're looking for someone that has maybe transferred into more of a disgruntled state of mind, if you will. And so I think having a good data set, understanding the data points that are important, understanding the way that your business operates, can help you establish a better outlier framework.
Yeah, I think, Cristian, to that point, that if you look, I was just at the National CIO Conference, and it's over 40 states now have a privacy officer at the CIO level that either reports to the CIO or to the governor of that state. And why that's really important is that cataloging and categorizing of data. And you're seeing that across a lot of organizations because of AI. Because of compliance, structured, unstructured data, what needs to be stored, how long. I know in Kentucky I had 3 warehouses that had stuff that was 150 years old. Do I need to keep that? Why do we need to keep it? And why can't we digitize it? And then why can't we get rid of it at some point? And a lot of it is set and forget. So having those conversations and really putting in real-time policies that gets rid of the data that you don't need in a timely manner.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, I touched on it before, but just to amplify, is knowing where, so data is absolutely oil. It is absolutely the thing that everyone's after. They steal identities to get to the data. So being relentlessly focused on understanding the data that's coming into your organization and out at the IP address level. You get very concrete, know where your data is going at an IP address level, know when that changes, know what amounts of data to those IP addresses are something that's normal, know what devices your users tend to log in from, so that when you see a new device, you can call them and say, hey, we just see a login from a device you haven't used before, is that you? So very practically understanding what your users are doing, and then being able to call them quickly when you see something that's outside the norm.
Yep.
Yeah, I think tying identity and access with all the data that's coming out, that was a bridge. Also one of the things that we were looking to solve. We just couldn't find the things that could marry them together so we could get all of the audit and the insights from that. So topic close to my heart, but and set up a company over it. That there's that kind of deep feeling towards it. Yeah. I know if I was going to say to implement one change in your organization to reduce that insider threat would be to look at your APIs. It's your biggest threat vector, according to Gartner, at the moment. And we can see so many different things that are happening around the AI space. So I think it's Kong that has, it's one of the API gateways that will say, there's no AI without APIs. So again, understanding that risk around that side. So again, quick plug. Do come and see us, English chocolate at our booth as well. Yeah. But if there was one change that you'd like...
Shameless plug.
You know what, I'm here from England. I've got nothing to lose. But if there was one thing that you'd want to change inside most organizations to reduce that insider threat, what would it be?
Yeah, I think if you look at the way in which we focused, and let's talk about email for a second. We've always worried about what's coming into our organization, right? Worried about making sure that those threats, links, et cetera. But the one thing we haven't focused a lot on is what's leaving the organization, right? What are your people sending? How do you know what they're sending and what it is? Because a lot of times, what is it? Fire and forget. And so we bought a company that integrates that, looks at the behavioral heuristics of your inbox, where your people are sending things. And I will tell you, from an insider threat perspective, you can get a real understanding, HIPAA, FERPA, CGIS, IRS 1075, what is leaving your organization by looking at the email that's going outbound. So that's one of the things I would implement.
Definitely, yeah.
I'd say keep an eye on AI. I hate to use AI because it just came from RSA and there was 47,000 vendors kind of screaming AI in this massive exhibit halls. AI everything. But I think that AI is absolutely being embedded in your business. I think that your developers are using it to make their lives easier. I think that your employees are trying to shortcut or short-circuit certain processes, which is, I think, fine to a certain extent. But there is a lot of inadvertent exposure of data that goes into these models. Some of these models even being internally used are black boxes. Some of these packages even are susceptible to different vulnerabilities. And I mentioned earlier that AI is a new insider threat, and I think that is actually absolutely going to be true based upon the velocity at which your business is adopting AI. And so if we take the DPRK narrative out of the picture for a second and we just talk about your employees just trying to do their jobs, I think that AI is actually going to be almost the nucleus of their jobs over the next 5 years, right? On how they accomplish their jobs. And I think understanding the way that you move data in and out of these different models is going to dictate what exposure is going to mean, even internally, right? If someone finds access to a model that's being worked on, data governance policies today, most organizations don't have a really good way to understand how you take intellectual property and commingle it with unclassified data. And as a result, what is that large language model going to inadvertently expose to the person asking the right question? So I think it's understanding where those models are, who has access to them. I don't think it necessarily is anything novel on there's a new way to secure AI. I think securing AI in the grand scheme of things is using the same practices you have today and just having AI at the center of that and securing the services around it. Right?
Yeah, I think in addition to everything that my colleagues up here have said, really is that API gateway. We've seen some recent data breaches from different cloud-hosted vendors, and one of their recommendations is to rotate the keys.
Yeah.
But if you don't know all the APIs that you have, you don't know which keys you need to rotate.
Yeah.
And that supply chain attack, especially in the cloud, which frankly nobody understands, the only really controlling mechanism you have is that API gateway where we could then trigger a key rotation for all of the APIs going through a particular cloud vendor. That is one that it's little understood, I think, today, but 6, 9, 12 months from now, we'll understand that topic a lot better. All of our organizations will be better served if we start exploring API gateways with the intent of how do I rotate keys if I have to.
Great point.
As engaging as I was to ask the questions, I will, again, talk about myself loads as much as I can. Yeah. But we've got 5 minutes left, and I thought I'd open up the room for if there's any questions from our esteemed panel here. And if not, I will just keep asking more questions.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy.
There's one in the front.
More about the API gateways.
You went. You brought it up first.
The question about rotating, like expanding on API gateways. Yeah, go for it.
So a big part of what we're looking to do is actually taking all APIs. So most of the time, we don't even know what data is flowing through those APIs. So just at least getting an inventory. So doing that classification, discovery, which ones are really exposed APIs. While I was at HSBC, we had about 90,000 APIs. It was an astronomical number. And to do that manually, I think it would have taken about 1,000 years or something like that. It was a ridiculous number to actually try and classify those. So again, using tools to be able to help us really hone down on the APIs that really are going to be the big risk exposure areas for us. And understanding that estate is a big part of it. But also doing other things. So again, API keys are great, but looking at other controls that you can add on top of it. So when we look at organizations, we're typically using RBAC to do that access management side of it. But can we bring other things to the table? So can we bring policy-based controls on it, or can we bring attribute-based controls or context-aware controls on it? So supplementing API keys and doing that, because that's going to be a really tough task because it's so many vendors together. How do you actually then do something that you can overlay over APIs to be able to actually achieve the same thing, but using other controls that are inside your identity framework? And I think that's a slightly different way that we look at it, look at the world and how we can do it. But
yeah, I was going to say, so data security posture management, right? We've moved all this stuff out to the cloud, right? Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, et cetera. But do you know what exactly is out there? What's the value of it? Who has access to it? And then how often, as people move positions, are they being removed from those authoritative groups, whether it's Active Directory or not? But that is an entire now environment that we have to look at, key management, et cetera. But understanding what actually is out there, what's moved out of your own environment, big deal right now in trying to manage it.
Yeah, let's go. We have a question.
you have another question?
Yes, thank you. How do you balance employee trust with necessary security monitoring to prevent insider threats?
How do you balance it? Gingerly. I think, again, educating your employees, getting your employees to buy into your mission as a company. I think that I'm a huge fan of culture, right, also, right? Just not throwing technology at the issue, but culture is so important. Getting your employees to buy into culture within the security space also. Like, this is why you're a good steward of the data that you have access to. This is what it means if the business is impacted. Right, we're going to get fined. People can lose their jobs. It's not just you getting a slap on your wrist. This is going to impact your families. Get people understanding that you are touching data that is sensitive, and this is how it's impacting your business unit. This is how it impacts the enterprise, and this is how it impacts the people that you work with, your peers, right? And just showing them, like, there's got to be a certain point where technology is absolutely a part of creating enforcement points and monitoring, and data, as I mentioned, is so important. But I think even culturally, it's important to have a common empathy of how data, or what data means to the business, and how your employees should treat it. So I'm a very big fan of get people to buy into understanding what their roles are, why it's so important to the business, and why them not inadvertently doing something that is going to leak data and impact the business is so important to just overall culture and their peers. And so I think start there, and then I think the technology, quite frankly, is easy in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah, I think it's leading with the why and leading with enablement.
Yeah.
Talking less and less about what you can't do and all the scary things that are out there and why we have to do it this way, and just say, this is context, it's a scary world, context, everything's complicated. To help you be safe and get your work done more efficiently, here's how we're going to help you do that.
Yeah, I think the carrot versus the stick, right? Governor Bevin said that to me. What are you going to do? You're going to lead with a stick, or are you going to give them the carrot? And so the ability, like my colleagues have said, of enticing someone, making it fun, having them involved, and not just October, right? When it's Security Awareness Month. How do you do that? How do you embed that throughout the year and help individuals understand? And then get feedback from them, right? Have that open communication. Hey, this isn't working, or hey, have you tried this? If you do that, I think the environment that you set will be right.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I'd like to see more like leaders as well, not leave it to that inertia and say it's always been done a particular way. That's also a balance that I think I'd like to see getting resolved over the course of the next. I think we're not going to have a choice, to be fair, that the pace that threats are coming in at. But it's been a great panel. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Yeah. Yep. All right.
Thank you.